hear people say that the ego can be the most dangerous thing ever for a person. It can be the number one source of somebody's downfall. The ego. 100% true. 100% true. So let's go with an ego-friendly message. We're gonna go ego-friendly. They even have an acronym for ego among the religious community. It's called easing God out. Ego, easing God out. That used to be a campaign in the 90s. The ego doesn't have to be devastated. It doesn't have to be disappointed. The ego it doesn't have to be broken, because to attempt these things, whether there's a win or a loss in the conflict, the ego can still rage on. The ego can still rage on in defeat. The ego can still rage on in disillusionment, disenchantment. The ego can still rage on. After a sound beating, the ego can still muster up the strength. And there's a reason for that. It's not because the ego is bad. Don't confuse the ego with vanity. Don't confuse the ego with somebody being conceited. Don't confuse the ego with somebody being greedy or gluttonous or controlling or demanding. These things are not the ego. An ego out of control takes a hold of these things and violates them. So they'll be ambitious, but if the ego's out of control, that ambition gets out of control and it becomes manipulative, grasping, conniving, going even into maliciousness, malice, treachery. So the ego doesn't have to be cured. It doesn't have to be destroyed. It can't be destroyed. It's connected to your self-preservation. It's your animus. It's your seat of the soul. It's your primal function. The ego. It doesn't have to be wounded. It simply has to be directed. This is all. The ego has to be directed. When the ego is misdirected, you get all of the things that take place with out of control-ism. There's one word that can really throw a person off if it's misunderstood. That word is disappointment. Disappointment. Now, disappointment is usually associated with failed expectations. Failed expectations. Not dissociation, but disappointment is usually associated with letdowns and unexpected results. The person couldn't predict what happened. So these things usually get associated with disappointment. But disappointment is a very tricky word because it can be used by a person who's just mad at you. It can be used by a person who's just trying to bend you. Disappointment can be used to house your mind into an invisible cage, whether it be your own cage by being too hard on yourself. You're disappointed for no reason. You haven't even proved enough to be disappointed. But yet every little thing that goes wrong through learned behavior, you're trained to be excessively difficult. It may be very unbending, unyielding, right? You might mimic your abusers, right? Disappointment is tricky because all it really is at the end of the day is just it's a positioning thing. It's a positioning factor. And if the ego be tied into status and things like that, and a person feeling fulfilled, then we have to tackle this idea of disappointment. So disappointment is not just, I'm let down, I didn't get what I expected. Disappointment goes even deeper than those failed expectations. Because to appoint somebody is to what? Is to place them in a position, to place them in power. You have to understand that a lot of people who are throwing the word disappointment on you or at you are not even in position. They haven't even been appointed to be disappointed by you. What do you mean you're disappointed in me? I never appointed you over me as a person that I should succumb to. We're peers, we're colleagues. But before you assume that this is a master-apprentice scenario, make sure that your ego has direction. A misdirected ego. This is what leads to ruin. This is what leads to the idea of disappointment being almost a gaslighting tool. But true disappointment is to lose position. And you can tell who the disappointments are. Just like that movie called The Disappointments Room, there's a disappointment realm. And it's full of people who are just disappointed in everything. They're so disappointed in this person who let them down. Disappointed in this person. And I'm not saying that you are wrong for feeling let down when you're let down. That's perfectly natural. But disappointed? Now, disappointment, it just, that word gets thrown around a lot when expectations are not met and fulfilled. But you have to ask yourself this: does the person or situations expressing disappointment toward you, do they really have that kind of appointment over you? Seriously. The ones who are disappointed at everything, they're never in position for real. They're disappointed in everything. So they can't attach to anything. They can't cooperate with anything. They don't work in sync with anything. They stick out like a sore thumb with everything. They're abrasive toward everything. They are dislocated, disjointed, disappointed, looking for an appointment. And they figure, hey, well, there's a ton of people who are miserable and misery loves company. I can always make an appointment with them. Yeah, but that checkup doesn't lead to preventative care. That checkup from the neck up doesn't include preventative care. It doesn't treat anything. All it does is provide a bigger landscape full of thorns and briars and hedge mazes for the ego to get further lost in, further misdirected in, further directionless in, out in the middle of the ocean without a sail, without navigational equipment, and with no wind. That's the ego when it gets wrapped up in words like disappointment. When I think about disappointment, I think about that scene in The Godfather, the second Godfather, right? When Michael Corleone's sister was getting ready to marry the guy. And he said, Connie, with me, you have everything you want, anything you can wish. And he wasn't even talking to the guy. The guy was right next to him, but he only addressed his sister and turned to square up with her as if the guy he wasn't even in a powerful enough position to even be worthy to have an audience with the Corleone family, of which Michael was now the Don of, played by Al Pacino, of course. He said, if you go on and marry this man, you'll disappoint me. In the look in his eyes, the expression on his face was cold-blooded murder. This is what he guaranteed. Just with his eyes, just with his body language, he was basically telling her, if you marry this man, you're gonna be a widow before the reception cake is done being eaten. Was what his expression was. Because he was in some position to be disappointed. He was the leader. He was the Don. So he was in some position. Connie depended on him for everything, resource-wise. She didn't even have enough range to even really get it on her own like that. Even if she tried, even if she made her scores, it wasn't nothing compared to a crime family's money. So Michael Corleone was in some position. He had an appointment over her life because of his power. So his ego, in that instance, was not misdirected. If the ego leads you to harm someone in this way, of course, in reality, yeah, there's always some misdirection there, unless you're talking about defending your own life. So it's disappointment. You know, they're not in position. A lot of people are not in, they don't even have an appointment with you to be disappointment. They have an appointment with misery. And sometimes, subconsciously, a person's higher self will run them into somebody with a higher vibration just to learn a lesson. They may think that, oh, now I have a bigger prey because I ran into a person with a bigger vibration. Nothing could be further from the truth. What do you think? Is people going out here with high vibrations intentionally without being led by some form of divine wisdom? Give your ego some direction. If that's what you're thinking, your ego is lost. And you just have to direct it. You don't have to lose it. You need your ego. You need it. It's your ego that makes you wipe up after you relieve yourself in the restroom. Ego makes you do that. Okay, so you need your ego. But when it gets out of control, you start wanting to what? Wipe everybody else up. They're not even in the process of relieving themselves. Nobody's even going to the restroom. You already running up on people with your wipes. This is clean. That's unclean. This is unclean. I want to make sure this is clean. They sanitize everything but their mind. They sanitize everything but their motivation. They want to wipe everything else down. But their heart is the thing that needs to be sitting in boiling bleach for a few decades so that they can heal properly. It's excessive. It's excessive. Out of control. Out of control. So it just needs that direction. Because one thing that the ego is not able to do, it's not able to be patient. Because it's not built, it's not based on logic. The ego is just simply animus. That's all it is. You can even go as far as saying that it's a more solidified, lower dimensional form of ego. You could say that. It would be a very proper analogy to simply say that ego is energy. When we mean it like this in a archetypal fashion. So you're not easing God out with your ego. You're not. It doesn't matter if you're feeling super confident, if you're feeling extra strong, extra powerful. If you're not trying to unappoint others, then just don't consider yourself a disappointment. But if you find yourself always griping and spending a lot more emphasis on what's wrong versus what's right overall, then you yourself might actually be a disappointment. Because we're naturally appointed to something. We're naturally appointed to joy. We're naturally appointed to life, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're appointed to this if you live here. When you're coming from a realm or a reality where this is not the case, where you don't feel naturally appointed to life, naturally appointed to liberty, naturally appointed to the pursuit of happiness, when you are not constituted, all you have is your ego. All you have is your ego. And since the ego is impatient, the body, the mind, and the heart can never sit still. And when raging rivers come up on a crystal glass smooth ocean front, they get perplexed. They get disappointed. They say, well, my river is raging. Why isn't your river raging the same way mine is? Well, for one thing, it's not a river. More of what's on the menu that you might like is coming out of my waters, the ocean, not the river. When we go to the beach, we're trying to get in the ocean, not the river. When you're trying to do some big deep sea fishing, keyword is sea, you're not going to the river to do that. When you surf, when you get on your jet skis, when you see people paragliding and parasailing and all things para, they're not at a river. When you see pictures of sandals resorts, they're not at a river. When you see advertisements of come to the Great Atlantis in the Bahamas, there's no scenes of a river. When people get lost in Florida, bodies aren't popping up in Fort Lauderdale. It's in the forts with the brown water. I always say that in Florida, jokingly, to people who are from there, family of mine. Stay in the blue water, not the brown water. Right. One thing for ocean water is that you have better visibility in that. You have better visibility in fresh water. Well, not fresh water, in salt water versus river water, you have a better visibility. As far as fresh water, I guess, assuming that it's fresh, you would think it's easier to see in that, but it's not. In fresh water, you'll still have darkness because underneath the surface, it's still dark. What sand does in salt water is provide different conduits of light. So yes, it's easier to see in salt water than any other water. These are literally the waters that heal because of salt. Simple chemistry. Simple chemistry. So you don't want to be disappointed. You want to have an ego-friendly life. And so you just direct your ego. You have to give it direction. If you allow the ego to decide what, where, when, and how, and why, that's when you get lost. But the ego is in its perfect glory when you're given it direction Because the ego is not to come first. The ego is to come second. The ego's job is to muster up the gratitude and to express the gratitude and the contentment and the fulfillment and the joy, the happiness, the satisfaction of life. That's what the ego is for. The ego is for believing in yourself. When times get challenging, that inner pep rally that you need to have, that's what the ego is for. The ego is for that. When you're feeling defeated, that you still cling on to strength because you're saying to yourself, well, as long as I still got ideas generating, I'm never out of the game. That is how the ego gets directed appropriately. That's the results of an ego that's in its proper position. The ego comes second. It's your heart, your wisdom, your training, your common sense, your learning that comes first. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And cry aloud for understanding. Is that not what the King James 16:11 pretty much says? Wisdom is the principal thing, not even love. They said in order to love oneself, they have to acquire wisdom. They said the acquisition of wisdom is the definition of self-love. But a lot of people self-lust, and that's where ego, when it's misdirected, it becomes self-lust. Said, well, I love myself. I'm asphyxiated on myself. Every time you see me, I'm doing this to myself. I'm pampering myself here, doing this here. Nothing wrong with being at your absolute best. But when you have the energy that decides to want to critique the world and be an existential critic, yeah, then you're cleaning up things that are already spotless. And then it makes all of the self-care that is supposed to pertain to self-love actually allow its mask to be slipped, and the true face under it is self-aggrandizement and delusions of grandeur. And to an extent, you have to have this in order to dream forward. How are you going to manifest anything if you're not delusional? If you're not delusional? You have to put something in your you have to put something in your energy that's different from what you're already carrying in your energy. If you want to get into a new energy and a new reality, you can sit there and visualize and chant all day long. If your energy is not right, you are going to be wrong. And if your energy is not right, you're going to be left. If your energy is not right, you're going to be left. Left where? Behind. Left where? Unappointed. You may not be disappointed if you never had an appointment in the first place. You may just be simply perpetually unappointed. And what is the expression of being unappointed? The individual and individuals being disappointed with everything. Super T Sigma, Sigma programming. Stay illuminated, people. Either seek peace or continue to be in pieces.